Hi! This time I wanted to talk about how to represent ceremonial magic and occult operations in tabletop role playing games. For those of you that haven't seen my other videos around this time of the year, I am focusing a bit more on paranormal and scary topics applied to role playing games. So if you have any ideas or suggestions that maybe I should talk about this subject or that, etc., please let me know in the comments section below. So, and of course, I haven't seen every role playing game in existence and every adventure module. So, if you think that there is a really good portrayal or representation of rituals and magical ceremonies and all of that in different RPGs or modules or whatever, please let me know in the comments as well. So, I've seen some pretty decent representations of rituals and any sort of operation, ceremonies in different role playing games and modules, although they are a bit more focused on immediate mechanical effects. Even if they say something like, oh, this ritual takes who knows how many hours to carry out, and when you do that, the player characters obtain this bonus to defense or to attack, or they summon this creature or something like that. But I think that in many of those cases, they fail to grasp the true experience or atmosphere of, of an occult operation or project according to real world occult philosophy. So in this video, I will try to communicate just that. And even if you are not into those sorts of things, I still hope that you will use this information as a sort of fictional element to enhance or enrich role-playing game sessions in which you want a more realistic approach to occult and paranormal related projects, operations, etc. So okay, many of the things that are omitted or that different designers do not fully grasp when it comes to those rituals, ceremonies, operations, etc., is that the moment a practitioner of one of those arts begins a sort of focuses on carrying out some sort of manifestation, then many things in the life of that practitioner start to be are affected by the very start of the process. So I am going to paint an imaginary situation that could happen with someone attempting such a thing, such a feat. Let's say that you have Joe. So Joe wants to perform this strange ritual that he read about in a grimoire. The very moment that Joe decides to carry out this operation, he needs to follow a very strict, highly disciplined path or way of doing things. And if he is not wise, he may end up hurting himself or killing himself, because many books of magic, many grimoires and such, a lot of them have traps. They have things that literally will cause the downfall of the reader and the one who is trying to put those projects into motion. For example, there are grimoires that tell you that it's okay to eat excrement or shit, or to rub it in your wounds and things like that. And that's a trap for someone who is not, I would like to say educated, but it also has to do with common sense and intelligence. Because sometimes you say education and you think that people could think that you are referring to the dogma and doctrine that is being used to brainwash people through different schools. But someone who is knowledgeable knows that excrement, shed contains deadly bacteria. So if you do that, you're going to end up killing yourself. So those are set up like traps to eliminate those that are not worthy of using the content of different grimoires. It doesn't appear in those sorts of traps do not appear in all grimoires, but there are some that do contain them. Another potential trap is that the operation itself omits different ritual details that could prove the devastation, the downfall of the practitioner. For example, maybe you see this operation that tells you this ritual process will allow you to create this sort of creature inside of a bottle, and so the like I said, the one who is doing the work follows all the step-by-step process, and suddenly inside the bottle there is nothing. And he said, doesn't make sense. It said in the book that inside the bottle there was going to be this strange creature or strange creatures, and I would be able to do this or that. And so naively, that person opens the bottle that should have been kept sealed throughout the entire process, and now before placing certain restrictions upon the beings inside the bottle, that person opens the bottle and the thing escapes and does something really bad to the person, even though the practitioner cannot see that invisible being. And like I said, this is just giving you some examples. If you want, you could use those as fiction for your adventures and role-playing game scenarios and all of that. That's what is the focus of this video. So let's say, like I said, we have this person known as Joe, and Joe decides to follow the process indicated by the book. So he manages to spot those traps and he will avoid them. So now Joe starts to look for the very specific ingredients to carry out the operation. These are highly specific, and it goes to show how in the past times of the Magi and many different practitioners from all over the world going into these different sorts of operations, they were expected to be highly knowledgeable in terms of medicine, of astrology and astronomy, of course. The earliest examples of different disciplines and fields of knowledge. So they needed to identify all of those traps, but also they needed to identify the proper materials, the plants, the metals, the stones, crystals to be used in those rituals. If they are sloppy, they could fail because they think that they could substitute some things. In some cases they could do that, they could use one thing instead of another, but they would have to be very knowledgeable in the use of different materials. That is, in the planetary correspondences of this or that stone or this or that metal or this or that herb. And that's the way that you can identify many different con artist moves on the part of different religions and cults throughout the years. For example, in Russia they said, the Christians in Russia, that if you took the silver cross of Jesus and you put it into the water, he would miraculously purify the water. But that's because of the silver in the cross. It's not because you have a corpse hanging from a stick that is going to purify the water. It's because the cross is made out of silver. So you can spot all of those different superstitions. Like, for example, the typical when you throw a coin inside of a well, they were supposed to be silver coins at one time. I think there is another metal that also purifies water. I don't remember which one was it at the moment. Was it copper? Well, let's say that they tossed silver coins in the well. That should keep the water clean, because silver has antibacterial and antiviral properties. So you can spot all of those different superstitions. And so Joe, let's say that he is quite knowledgeable and identifies the correct ingredients for the operation. However, here is one of the more magical and potentially scary aspects of the magical operations. Because Joe is going to carry out an operation that puts into movement or mobilizes incredible forces, angelic, demonic, and perhaps deity-like powers. Well, there are going to be different entities that may not feel too pleased about what Joe is doing. They don't want to be. They don't want Joe to step into their domains of power. So they start to send servants against Joe. Maybe Joe, while he's looking for those materials to use in the ritual, different, maybe he's looking for some sort of weapon. We will talk about those in a few moments. Some plants or stones or whatever. He suddenly starts to get attacked by someone. Maybe there is this guy that randomly attacks him verbally or physically, and he has to survive somehow. But later on, if that guy is, let's say that Joe manages to escape, and maybe the police catches the guy, and when the police interrogate that attacker, the attacker has no recollection of what he did to Joe. So you could say that that attacker was possessed by one of the demons that wanted to stop Joe from carrying out a sort of miraculous operation. So as you can see, all of those things can be introduced in a scenario or in an adventure. From the very start, as the player characters are trying to carry out this ritual, they suddenly suffer different difficulties, not only because of the traps of the grimoire that they are using, but because of the individuals that are possessed by demons, or maybe they have trouble obtaining very rare or difficult to find ingredients or materials. I think one of the best role-playing games that represents this sort of situation is Cult Divinity Lost. If you haven't seen my review of Cult Divinity Lost, please check out my playlist in the description below. So let's say that Joe obtained all of those materials and he identified those traps in the grimoire. But now here comes another tricky part. Joe needs to follow a certain period, a certain routine of purification. Maybe he needs to fast. He needs to reduce the amount of food that he's going to eat. Maybe he needs to carry out some sort of prayer or meditation at very specific times during the day. There is a horror movie called A Dark Song. Maybe I should do a video on that movie. Yeah, I should talk about that movie. Yes. Okay, just to give you a very small summary concerning this, with the subject related to this video. Joe needs to carry out some very difficult, like I said, like a routine or set of exercises in order for something to happen. And there are some grimoires that also have traps when it comes to this disciplinary process. Oftentimes, in those cases, the author writing the ritual knows that an average person is not exactly very virtuous. You need the highest quality in terms of, yes, of human virtue when it comes to the practitioner trying to carry out that operation. So if you take your average Joe, maybe that person is not, in this case Joe, he's not very virtuous, not very, like a very decent person. He's just like very average. And so he needs to carry out this sort of process in which he separates himself from selfish desires, from the needs of the ego. He starts to become aware of a greater purpose or greater scheme of things, because that is the mindset, the only mindset that will give you some sort of control or domain over the chaotic forces that you are going to summon. So Joe carries out this operation. I'm really excited about doing a video about the Dark Song. I think that's going to be my next video before I do another video based on a somewhat original take on a graveyard adventure that I came up with. But okay, so Joe engages this sort of ritual process, and he manages to, maybe it requires several months. There are some errors when it comes to the translation of different grimoires. They could be fatal. There is a very famous book, and I am going to talk about it when I talk about the movie that I told you, The Dark Song. Mm, and I think it caused the downfall of many of the more famous. I don't know if I should call them occultists, because what they did, it felt more like I said, like something a brujo or bruja, like a dark practitioner would do. Hmm. Well, okay. Many of the members of the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, I think they caused their own downfall because they carried out a certain operation, and the translation was so bad because it was done by the leader of the Hermetic Order that was not. He was quite lackluster, in my opinion. He omitted several months needed for the operation. So many of them carried out the process, although I am quite suspicious of that process. They carried out an incomplete process, and they suffered for it, dying by cancer and uh, respiratory issues, all of that. So, like I said, Joe had to follow a very strict process when it comes to the whole work, the magical art that he's trying to perform. Let's say that he managed to go through all of that rigorous training, and now the day for the operation approaches, and it should be done at a very creepy, suitable time, because otherwise the energies of the sun could burn the forces that he's going to put into motion, that he's going to defeat and potentially command. So now Joe, the day arrives, or rather the night, and he does it at a very specific moment, and he creates this circle with all sorts of names and symbols, and he must remain within the circle at all times. He will be tricked into moving outside of the circle. There is another good movie, I forget the name, one that starts with Christopher Lee. I forget the name. The Devil Writes Out. Really good movie. Well, okay. So Joe stands in the middle of this circle with all of his implements, and funny enough, many of the tools of the magician, it kind of looks as if the magician is going out to war. He's armed with swords and daggers and many things that are for the protection of the practitioner, because if any being tries to penetrate the circle, that will be the only means of protecting himself, of dissipating or disintegrating the creature, because it is well known in occult lore that there are very few entities that can resist the attack from cold steel or iron. So Joe stands within the circle, and he starts to make the calling summon. He starts to summon many entities, or just one very particular entity, and he is supposed to be protected by the names in the circle. But then something starts to call out to him from outside of the circle, depending on the weakness of Joe. Maybe he had a loved one that passed away, a relative that died, and Joe never got to say something to that person, and suddenly you see that person outside of the circle, and that entity is trying to, how would you say, lure Joe outside of the circle. Or maybe Joe is quite horny, and very beautiful, exquisite, naked women start to appear outside of the circle, and they start to beckon, to call, yes, to entice Joe into stepping out of the circle. And Joe must remain steadfast, and through the use of different bindings and commands, he manages to dissipate all of those illusions, and he manifests in a semi tangible way somewhere between the ethereal and astral planes that are beyond our physical reality. He manages to perceive this wispy form of the entity that he has summoned. And now Joe can make the petition or give the command for that entity to do Joe's bidding. However, here is when you see the true mettle of Joe, his worth as a human. Is he going to ask for something very selfish? Or is he doing something not only for his benefit but for the benefit of the entire world? That is up to Joe to decide. And this is just a small example. As you can see, you can create an entire scenario, perhaps even a short campaign, gathering the materials, the information to carry out the training for this operation. Many different encounters could happen between the forces of evil that are possessing people to attack the practitioners. The day of the ceremony itself could be resolved through roleplay and different skill checks. Maybe you can also add some sort of minigame or subsystem to better represent the event. But there are many other ways of doing these sorts of occult or magical works. For example, a circle is not always needed. It is needed in most cases, and for those that are more inexperienced, because otherwise they are at the mercy of the entities that they summon. But someone who is a force to be reckoned with can pretty much do that with little to no material aids or any sort of tool. So I just wanted to give you these ideas for your horror-themed adventures. If you have any comments or questions about this or how to implement them into role-playing games, or if you have your own experiences using that, oh, I created this adventure scenario, or I ran this other module and they represent that ritual operation quite well, please let me know in the comment section below. And please, if you have suggestions for scary topics or scary themes, paranormal things, esoteric things, etc., that I could use as an idea for a video, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.